How I Rebuilt My Life After Dating a Mama's Boy. The shocking family dinner that cost me everything but saved my future. The sound of shattering ceramics still makes me flinch. 3 years later, and I can close my eyes and see it perfectly. Margaret Caldwell's manicured hands launching her world-famous lasagna against the eggshell white dining room wall, tomato sauce exploding like a crime scene across imported wallpaper that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I can hear the stunned silence that followed, broken only by my desperate gasps for air as a full-blown panic attack took hold. That night cost me nearly everything I had: my savings, my apartment, my credit score, and 6 months of my life. But looking back now, from the other side of the nightmare, I realize it saved me from something far worse: a lifetime of slow erasure. The $5,000 mistake everyone warned me about. He still hasn't introduced you to his parents? After 5 months? My best friend Zoe stirred her coffee with visible concern. That's weird, Liv. Really weird. I shrugged, defensive of the relationship I'd convinced myself was perfect. His family is complicated. They're very particular about who he dates. Particular? Zoe raised an eyebrow. Or controlling? Because those are two very different things. I should have listened. Instead, I ordered another overpriced latte I couldn't afford and changed the subject. By that point, I'd already spent over $5,000 trying to fit into Ethan Caldwell's world. Designer clothes that hung in my closet with tags still attached, weekend getaways to vineyards and ski resorts, dinners at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my entire grocery budget for the week. Teaching second grade had never made me feel poor before, but dating Ethan, with his law firm salary and family money, had introduced me to a whole new kind of financial insecurity, the kind where you're constantly aware that your entire month's rent equals one weekend at the hotels, he suggests casually, as if everyone can afford boutique luxury on a whim. I just think it's odd that after all this time, you've never even seen where he grew up, Zoe persisted. Don't you think that's strange? I did think it was strange, but admitting that would mean acknowledging the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach whenever Ethan deflected questions about his family. It would mean facing the reality that maybe this relationship wasn't as balanced as I desperately wanted it to be. His parents are just private people, I replied, the lie tasting bitter even as it left my mouth. Besides, they travel a lot. Another lie. I had no idea if they traveled. I knew almost nothing about Richard and Margaret Caldwell beyond their names, their wealth, and the fact that they had, according to Ethan, high standards for their only son. High standards that apparently didn't include elementary school teachers from middle-class backgrounds. The invitation that changed everything. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was supervising recess duty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I glanced down, I saw Ethan's name. Mom and Dad want to meet you. Sunday dinner at their place. You free? 6 words that should have made me happy. 6 words that instead sent a wave of inexplicable dread through my body. After 6 months of dating, I was finally being invited into the sacred inner circle of the Caldwell family. This should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like evaluation, like I was being summoned for judgment. I texted back immediately. Of course. Should I bring anything? His response came quickly. Just yourself. 6 p.m. I'll pick you up. No, they're excited to meet you. No reassurance that it would be fine. Just logistics. As if we were planning a business meeting rather than what should have been a joyful family introduction. That weekend, I made what I now recognize as one of the most financially irresponsible decisions of my life. I spent $700, nearly half my rent, on a designer dress I couldn't afford. Emerald silk that made my eyes pop and clung to my body in all the right places. A dress that screamed, I belong in your world. even though my maxed out credit card definitely whispered otherwise. You look incredible, my roommate Sarah said as I twirled nervously in our living room that Sunday. But Liv, you know you don't have to try this hard, right? If they don't like you for you, then they're not worth impressing. I wish I'd listened. That $700 dress now hangs in the back of my closet, a silk memorial to my most expensive mistake, the house that screamed, Miss. Warning. You ready for this? Ethan asked as we pulled through wrought iron gates that opened automatically to admit his BMW. His parents' neighborhood wasn't just wealthy, it was generational wealthy. The kind where houses don't have visible addresses, because if you need to ask, you don't belong there. Absolutely, I lied, smoothing the silk of my dress with damp palms. The Caldwell estate was exactly what I'd feared, a colonial mansion with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that definitely required a full-time staff to maintain. The kind of house that appears in movies about old money and the secrets it keeps. Just be yourself, Ethan said, squeezing my hand as we approached the imposing front door. They're going to love you. Another lie. We both knew it, though only one of us was honest enough to admit it to themselves. Margaret Caldwell opened the door before we could ring the bell. She was slim, blonde, and immaculately dressed in what I immediately recognized as designer clothes. The real kind, not the outlet versions I occasionally splurged on. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she air-kissed her son's cheek. Ethan, darling, and you must be Olivia. Not, we've heard so much about you, or we're so happy to finally meet you. Just my name, pronounced carefully, like she was testing out a foreign word she wasn't sure how to say. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. I extended my hand, which she took briefly with cool fingers. Margaret, please. Mrs. Caldwell makes me sound ancient. She laughed, a practiced sound containing zero actual humor. Come in, both of you. Richard is waiting in the study. The interior of the house was a museum, pristine white furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it, original artwork on walls, and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual salary. I was afraid to touch anything, aware that my presence alone somehow threatened to disrupt the perfect order of this mausoleum they called home. Richard Caldwell was tall like his son, but broader, with silver at his temples and the confident posture of a man who had never been told no in his professional life. He was nursing a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in what could only be described as a literal study. Leather-bound books, a mahogany desk, and the lingering scent of expensive cigars. "So you're the teacher," he said by way of greeting, extending a hand that engulfed mine. "Admirable profession. Underpaid, of course, but admirable." The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with the silver butter knife I'd later see on their dining table. "Dad," Ethan warned, but there was no real reprimand in his tone. It was the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime accommodating rather than challenging. I should have left then. Should have invented an emergency, a sudden illness, anything to escape the mounting tension that thrummed through this house like an electrical current. But I stayed, determined to prove myself worthy of their precious son. That was my first mistake of many that night. The $100,000 dinner conversation that revealed everything. The dining room featured a table that could comfortably seat 12, but was set for only 4, making the space between us feel deliberate and isolating. Crystal glasses caught the light from an overhead chandelier, refracting it into tiny rainbows across a tablecloth that was probably worth more than my car. "Ethan tells us you teach second grade," Margaret said as she poured wine into glasses that looked too delicate to actually use. "That must be fulfilling." The way she said fulfilling made it clear she meant beneath you, or more accurately, beneath my son. "It is," I replied, determined to stay positive. Children that age are so curious and open-minded. Every day brings something new. Hmm, she hummed non-committally. Richard and I always hoped Ethan would find someone in the legal field, like himself. Professional compatibility is so important for long-term success, don't you think? And there it was, the first direct hit. I took a large sip of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I think connection and shared values matter more than shared professions, I answered, feeling Ethan's hand find mine under the table. Richard made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Values like ambition and drive, certainly. Speaking of which, Ethan, have you given any more thought to Harrison's offer? Senior partnership doesn't come around often. Ethan tensed beside me. Dad, we agreed not to discuss work tonight. I'm simply asking a question, Richard replied, his tone hardening slightly. If you're serious about building a future, especially if that future includes family plans, he glanced meaningfully at me, then you need to think seriously about your 5-year trajectory. The subtext was clear. If Ethan was considering a future with me, he needed more money, more status, more everything to compensate for what I lacked. This wasn't just a dinner, it was an intervention. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more uncomfortable than the last. By the time Margaret disappeared into the kitchen to retrieve what she called Ethan's favorite, my grandmother's lasagna recipe, I was already feeling the first constriction in my chest, the telltale sign of anxiety building toward panic. I've made it exactly the way you love it, Margaret announced as a uniformed housekeeper, an actual uniformed housekeeper straight out of a period drama, carried in a ceramic dish that was set in the center of the table with the ceremony of a religious offering. The lasagna looked and smelled amazing, layers of pasta, cheese, and sauce visible from the perfectly cut square Margaret served onto Ethan's plate first. When she came to my plate, the portion was noticeably smaller, as if I needed to earn the right to their family recipe. Thank you, I said anyway. It looks delicious. It's really all in the herbs, she replied, and using the right cheese, of course, not that pre-shredded nonsense from supermarkets. I took my first bite as they watched, feeling like I was auditioning for a role I didn't want in a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. The lasagna was good, very good, actually. It's wonderful, I said sincerely. Margaret smiled, satisfied, and turned to Ethan. Darling, tell me what you think. I used a bit more basil this time. Ethan took a large bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then frowned slightly. It's good, Mom, but did you use a different cheese? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Margaret's smile froze, then slowly disappeared. What do you mean, different? Her voice was dangerously soft. I don't know, it just tastes different from how you usually make it. Still good, just different. He was trying to backpedal, but it was too late. He'd committed the cardinal sin. He'd criticized her cooking. Richard put down his fork with deliberate care. Your mother spent hours on this meal, Ethan? I know, Dad, and it's delicious. No, please, continue. Margaret interrupted, her voice tight. Tell me exactly what's wrong with the lasagna I've been making perfectly for 30 years. The lasagna you always claimed was your favorite meal. Ethan looked trapped. Nothing's wrong with it, Mom. It's great. I just thought maybe you tried something new. Something new? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. Why would I change a perfect family recipe? Unless you're saying it was never perfect to begin with. This was insanity. They were arguing about pasta. Literal pasta. I looked between them, waiting for someone to laugh, to break the tension and acknowledge the absurdity of this escalating situation. No one laughed. Margaret, Richard said in a warning tone that suggested this wasn't their first food-related conflict. Ethan didn't mean anything by it. Oh, I think he did, she replied, her eyes now bright with unshed tears. I think he's saying that his mother, who has only ever wanted the best for him, can't even make his favorite meal correctly anymore, and I have to wonder why that is. Her gaze swiveled to me, the accusation unmistakable. Somehow, in the twisted logic of this family, I had corrupted Ethan's taste buds. 6 months of exposure to me, and he could no longer appreciate his mother's lasagna properly. I felt my chest constrict further, the panic attack building rapidly now. My breathing shortened, my heart rate accelerated, and the room seemed to shrink around me. Ethan, oblivious to my growing distress, was still trying to salvage the situation. Mom, you're overreacting. The lasagna is fine. Wrong move. Fine? Margaret whispered, as if he'd slapped her. 30 years of perfecting a recipe, and it's fine? That's not what I meant. What did you mean then? Richard cut in, his voice rising to match his wife's distress. Because it sounds like you're being deliberately ungrateful. I'm not ungrateful. Just what? Margaret demanded. Just decided that everything I do isn't good enough anymore? Just like you've decided that everything we want for you isn't good enough? And there it was, the real issue. Not the lasagna. Me. I was what wasn't good enough. I was the reason Ethan was questioning the perfection of their carefully constructed world. My chest tightened further. The room began to blur slightly at the edges. I reached for my water glass with trembling fingers, nearly knocking it over. No one noticed. Mom, this has nothing to do with, Ethan started. Don't lie to me, Margaret interrupted, her voice now raised to a near shout. This has everything to do with your choices lately. Your sudden disinterest in the partnership, your constant unavailability for family events, the way you've changed. I haven't changed, Ethan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. You have, Richard joined in, his deep voice overlapping with Margaret's higher-pitched accusations until they were practically shouting in stereo. Ever since you started dating? Leave Olivia out of this, Ethan snapped, finding his spine at last. Why should we? Margaret fired back. She's clearly behind all of this. 6 months and suddenly you're questioning everything. Your career, your future, even your mother's cooking. I couldn't breathe. The panic attack that had been threatening all evening descended fully, wrapping around my lungs like a vice. My vision tunneled, the chandelier lights multiplying and blurring. A roaring filled my ears, partially drowning out the shouting that was reaching fever pitch around the table. I needed air. I needed to escape. I needed... The next few seconds happened in slow motion. Margaret, tears now flowing freely, stood abruptly, grabbing the lasagna dish. If it's so terrible, then no one should have to suffer through it. Richard reached for her arm. Margaret, don't! But it was too late. With a strength I wouldn't have expected from her slender frame, she hurled the ceramic dish against the dining room wall. It exploded on impact, sending shards of pottery and chunks of pasta raining down onto the pristine carpet. Sauce splattered like a Rorschach test across the pale wall, a violent ink blot of family dysfunction. In the ringing silence that followed, the only sound was my gasping breath as I fought for oxygen. Finally, 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. For the first time that evening, I had their full attention. Are you crying? Margaret asked, incredulous, as if her dinner-destroying tantrum was perfectly reasonable, but my tears were an overreaction. I wasn't just crying, I was having a full-blown panic attack. My chest heaved with the effort to draw breath, my hands tingled with numbness, and the room continued to swim in and out of focus. She's having a panic attack, Ethan said, his voice suddenly close to my ear. His arm went around my shoulders. It's okay, Liv. Just breathe. In and out, slowly. The concern in his voice was genuine, but all I could think was, this has happened before. He recognized a panic attack immediately because he'd seen them before. This wasn't the first time his parents had driven someone to this point. Richard looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar. Perhaps she should lie down. Perhaps you should both apologize, Ethan shot back, a flash of anger finally breaking through his carefully maintained diplomacy. Margaret, still standing beside the ruins of her family recipe, folded her arms. For what? Being honest? Caring about your future? I couldn't take any more. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the edge of the table for support. I need to go, I managed to gasp between shallow breaths. Olivia, wait, Ethan began, but I was already moving, blind instinct guiding me toward the front door, toward escape. Behind me, I heard the argument reignite, three voices rising again in familiar patterns. I fumbled with the heavy front door, finally wrenching it open and gulping the cool night air like a drowning person breaking the surface. I made it halfway down the driveway before Ethan caught up to me. The 10-minute conversation that saved me years of pain. Liv, stop, please, he said, gently catching my arm. I'm so sorry. They're not usually like this. The lie was so enormous, so completely contradicted by everything that had just happened, that it actually stopped my panic attack through sheer disbelief. I stared at him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. Not usually like this, I repeated, my voice hoarse. Ethan, your mother just threw a ceramic dish at the wall because you said her lasagna tasted different, and you're acting like that's, what, a bad day? An off night? He had the grace to look ashamed. You don't understand. They're under a lot of pressure. Dad's firm is going through changes, and Mom's planning the charity gala, and— Stop, I interrupted. Just stop. Those aren't explanations. They're excuses. What happened in there wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. I know it wasn't okay, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But there my parents live. What am I supposed to do? And there it was. The red flag everyone in my life had seen waving frantically for 6 months while I remained willfully blind. Ethan wasn't a victim of his parents' dysfunction. He was a willing participant. He enabled it, excused it, and, most damning of all, he expected the people who loved him to do the same. You're supposed to set boundaries, I said quietly. You're supposed to protect the people you care about from being treated that way. You're supposed to recognize when behavior is toxic, even especially when it comes from family. He stared at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and confusion, as if I'd started speaking a language he didn't understand. You want me to cut off my parents because they had an argument about dinner? That wasn't an argument about dinner? My voice rose despite my best intentions. That was a disturbing display of emotional manipulation and rage because you dared to express an independent thought, and you're standing here defending it. From the house came the continued sounds of arguing, muffled but still audible. This wasn't ending anytime soon. They'd simply moved on to the next act in a play they'd performed countless times before. Take me home, I said, suddenly exhausted. Please, just take me home. The $15,000 aftermath nobody warned me about. The drive back to my apartment was silent. I stared out the window, watching the suburban mansions give way to city apartments, the physical distance from that house doing little to ease the emotional impact of what I'd witnessed, what I'd finally understood. Ethan pulled up outside my building and turned to me, his expression earnest. Liv, I'm really sorry about tonight. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Next weekend, let's go away somewhere, just the two of us. My buddy has that lake house in Vermont. Ethan, I interrupted, my voice tired but clear. I can't do this anymore. He blinked, genuinely surprised. Do what? Liv, it was one bad night. Don't overreact. There it was again. The minimizing, the subtle suggestion that my feelings were an overreaction rather than a perfectly reasonable response to a completely insane situation. It's not just tonight, I said slowly, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. It's everything. The way you let your parents dictate your career choices, the way you've hidden me from them for 6 months because you knew they wouldn't approve, the way you've been slowly pushing me to change my clothes, my apartment, even the way I teach, to make me more acceptable to them. That's not true, he protested, but weakly. We both knew it was. It is true. And the worst part is, I've been letting you do it. I've been changing myself, spending money I don't have, ignoring my own instincts, all to fit into a mold that was never going to accept me anyway. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Liv, please. My parents are difficult. I know that. But they're just one part of my life. Our life together doesn't have to revolve around them. But it does, I said sadly. It has from the beginning. Every decision you make, from what job you take, to what apartment you live in, to what relationship you pursue, is filtered through the lens of their approval. And I can't live like that. I won't. So you're breaking up with me because my mom threw a lasagna? His attempt at lightness fell painfully flat. I'm breaking up with you because I finally see the red flag that's been there all along, I corrected gently. You will never put me first. You will never stand up to them. And eventually, the person I am will completely disappear under the weight of trying to be the person they want me to be. He stared at me for a long moment, and I thought perhaps he might argue, might finally show some of the backbone with me that he couldn't seem to find with his parents. Instead, he sighed and looked away. You're making a mistake, he said softly. We're good together, Liv. No, I replied, opening the car door. We're not. We never were. We were just both pretending to be people we aren't. I didn't look back as I walked into my building. I didn't cry until I was safely inside my apartment, the door locked behind me. And then I sobbed. For the 6 months I'd wasted, for the money I'd spent, for the person I'd nearly lost trying to become someone else. What I didn't know then was that my troubles were just beginning. The aftermath of that dinner would cost me far more than just a relationship. Ethan didn't accept our breakup gracefully. There were tearful phone calls, elaborate flower deliveries, even a surprise appearance at my school that nearly cost me my job when he caused a scene in the parking lot. His parents got involved too, which should have surprised no one. Margaret called my principal to suggest I was emotionally unstable and shouldn't be trusted with children. Richard used his legal connections to interfere when I tried to rent a new apartment, suddenly finding myself mysteriously rejected despite excellent credit. Eventually, I had to get a restraining order against all three of them. The legal fees, combined with the debt I'd accumulated during our relationship, and the security deposit on the new apartment I had to find quickly, wiped out my savings completely and plunged me into debt that took 2 years to dig out from. The final tally of what that relationship cost me financially? Just over $15,000. Between the clothes I'd bought to impress him, the dinners and trips I'd helped pay for, the legal fees, and the therapy I ultimately needed to process the emotional fallout. It cost me professionally, too. Though my principal ultimately didn't fire me, the whispers and sideways glances from parents who'd heard rumors about my instability followed me for months. I eventually changed schools, seeking a fresh start where my reputation wasn't tainted by Margaret Caldwell's vindictive lies. And emotionally, the cost was beyond calculation. For months, I jumped every time a dish clattered. I had panic attacks in restaurants when I heard raised voices. I second-guessed every decision, wondering if I was being too sensitive or overreacting. How I rebuilt my life in 365 days. Rock bottom came exactly 3 weeks after the infamous dinner. I was sitting on my bathroom floor at 3 a.m., having woken from yet another nightmare about shattering dishes and screaming voices. My bank account was overdrawn. My credit score had plummeted. I'd started calling in sick to work because I couldn't face the day. I realized I had two choices: stay in this spiral of self pity and fear, or reclaim my life one piece at a time. I chose the latter. Step one was financial triage. I made an appointment with a free financial counselor at my credit union, swallowing my pride to lay out the full extent of the damage. Together, we created a repayment plan for my credit card debt and a strict budget that left little room for anything beyond necessities. No more takeout, no more impulse purchases, no more $5 lattes. It was ramen noodles and store brand cereal for months, but every dollar I saved went toward rebuilding my emergency fund and paying down debt. Step two was professional rehabilitation. I enrolled in an advanced certification program for elementary education, specializing in childhood trauma, something I now had firsthand experience with, albeit from the adult perspective. The additional credentials not only helped me secure a position at a better school, but reminded me why I'd chosen teaching in the first place. Because I genuinely loved helping children grow and learn, not because it was a placeholder until I found a more prestigious career. Step three was emotional healing. I found a therapist who specialized in toxic relationships and offered sliding scale fees for teachers. Weekly sessions helped me recognize the patterns I'd fallen into, not just with Ethan, but in previous relationships as well. I learned about codependency, about setting boundaries, about recognizing red flags before they became emergencies. I learned that my worth wasn't determined by designer clothes or approval from people who would never truly see me. I learned that panic attacks weren't signs of weakness, but my body's way of screaming truths my mind wasn't ready to hear. And slowly, month by month, I rebuilt. 1 year after the lasagna incident, I was debt-free, with a small but growing savings account. I'd moved to a cozy apartment in a neighborhood I actually loved, not one I'd chosen to be closer to Ethan's world. I'd received a promotion at my new school, heading up a program for students dealing with anxiety and trauma. I'd made new friends who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they wanted me to be. I'd even started dating again, cautiously, with clearer eyes and firmer boundaries. No more ignoring red flags. No more changing myself to fit someone else's expectations. What I wish someone had told me sooner. It's been 3 years now since that night. 3 years of growth, healing, and reclaiming my authentic self. I no longer flinch at the sound of breaking dishes, though I still don't eat lasagna. Some associations may never fully fade. I've occasionally run into mutual acquaintances who know Ethan, who tell me he's still single, still working at his father's firm, still living in the apartment his parents helped him choose, still trapped in the same patterns that cost us both so much. Sometimes I feel a fleeting sadness for him, for the man he might have become if he'd found the courage to break free from his parents' toxic grip. But mostly, I feel grateful for the painful lesson that ultimately saved me from a lifetime of slow erosion. If I could go back in time and whisper advice to my younger self, the woman staring at that $700 dress and thinking it would somehow make her worthy, here's what I'd say. 1. True love doesn't require transformation. If someone only wants you if you change fundamental aspects of yourself, your career, your appearance, your values, that's not love. That's control disguised as care. 2. Listen to your friends. They see what you're blind to. When multiple people express concern about the same aspects of your relationship, pay attention. 3. Trust your instincts. That knot in your stomach when your partner deflects questions about their family, that discomfort when they subtly criticize your life choices, those aren't signs of your inadequacy. They're warning signals about the relationship. 4. Watch how they treat service staff and how they talk about their exes. These are preview glimpses of how they'll eventually treat you. 5. The most dangerous red flags are the ones being held by the people claiming to love us the most. Love doesn't demand erasure. It doesn't require perfection. It makes room for growth, but never at the cost of your authentic self. That dinner cost me nearly everything. But in losing what I thought I wanted, I found what I actually needed: the courage to live authentically, the wisdom to recognize red flags before they become emergencies, and the knowledge that sometimes walking away, however painful, is the greatest act of self-love possible. I never thought I'd be grateful for a shattered lasagna dish and a panic attack at a disastrous family dinner. But sometimes our worst moments contain the seeds of our greatest transformations. If you're reading this and recognizing your own relationship in my story, if you're hiding parts of yourself, spending beyond your means to impress someone, or making excuses for inexcusable behavior, please know it's not too late to choose yourself. The path won't be easy, but I promise it will be worth it. Your future self is waiting on the other side of courage. Don't keep her waiting too long.